Hey, Mitch, how's it going?
Good, thank you.
Good. Like I said, this is all about the name of the show is OTT, Out the Trunk. It's sort of a hip hop reference. You know, if you had limited resources, you don't have a record label, you don't have marketing. You start from your trunk. You sell you used to. Now people buy stuff digitally, but you used to sell your tapes out of your trunk or your CDs out
Yeah,
of your trunk. So
yeah,
this is my premise of the show. And so before you start, you need to have a purpose. And this is why I'm talking to you right now. So can you give me a little bit of backstory on like yourself and, just a brief intro about yourself?
sure. I worked for many, many years in corporate publishing, and I had no purpose. When I was in my mid 30s, I didn't have a strong sense of what I was doing in publishing, what I was doing with my life. And it was only in my late 30s that I re entered the world of writing, which I thought I had left behind many, many years ago when I had been in my early 20s. I wrote a profile for Science of Mind magazine of the Major League pitcher Barry Zito, who uses metaphysical methods as part of his training. And long story short, when I wrote that profile, I discovered my definite chief aim, which was to document metaphysical experience. And once I really honed in on that aim and felt that aim with a sense of passion and totality, things started to happen. It was extraordinary. I put a great deal of work into it. I put a great deal of sweat equity into it. But about 3 years from the period of time that I discovered my aim, I had a book contract with Random House, which became my first book, Occult America. Other books followed. Today, I'm a PEN Award-winning historian, writing and speaking on the history and practice of the metaphysical is my aim in life. It's what I do. It's what you and I are doing here together this morning, what I'm doing with your listeners. So there was a tremendous amount of work involved, and I still put many hours and many days and evenings into my work. It's an absolute passion. But that passion wouldn't have had a channel, wouldn't have had any pipes to go through, so to speak, if I wasn't focused on one definite chief aim. So finding that aim, for me, was like turning the lights on. It changed everything.
Okay, great. And you did talk about your story a little bit in your book,
Yeah,
and I like it how you had a section in there where you talked about if you felt like you were moderately successful and by anybody else's standards, but if you don't have that within yourself, you don't feel like you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish out of life yourself,
yeah.
then you need to find your aim. And just real quick, can you talk about what is a DC? What's the definite chief aim, and why is it so vital to any sort of successful pursuit?
Sure. A definite chief aim is one absolute passionate goal to which you're dedicated in life. It can't just be something that is a desire or a wish. It has to be something that enlists all of your energies. It has to be something that you feel with an obsessive intensity. And very often we use the word obsessive today in a negative way, as if it's a diagnosis that needs to be ignored. But the truth is, if you look at the lives of people you admire, whoever they may be, artists, entrepreneurs, teachers, whatever walk of life they happen to be from, you'll almost always find that they have one obsessive purpose at their back. And people often ask me how I found time to write. I worked for many, many years as a publishing executive. My wife and I raised two boys in New York City who now are ages 10 and 13. Life is busy, as it is for most people. It was really passion that drove me through it and that continues to drive me. I didn't publish my first book until I was age 43, 44. Today I'm 51. And I didn't embark on my career as an author until I was at the point of what we consider middle age. I was at a point when I began to get published that most people think of as a stage where you start to settle. You start to settle for things in life. Well, this is what I do. This is where I am. This is what I'm about. But I was able to do more at that point in life than we're traditionally taught to expect from ourselves. And a large part of that was due to having this obsessive, passionate aim, which for me was becoming a writer again, writing about metaphysical experience, documenting metaphysical experience in history and practice, speaking about it, writing, narrating, presenting. And the passions that you attach to that and the emotions that you attach to that are really what will drive you through. When you're doing something that you really want to do, procrastination ceases to become a problem. Questions of time, while time is always an issue, very often we use the term time really to define what we want to do and what we don't want to do. I filled out an application for something that I was interested in the other day, and I was able to fill out that application very quickly, very completely, with great energy, because I really wanted the object at the back of it. I wanted the thing that I was applying for. If you gave me a commensurate task that would have required an equivalent amount of detail that I wasn't interested in, I would have said something to you like, oh, when can I find the time to do this? I don't have time. Time is a tricky word. It really is relative, and it's usually relative to our desires. That's been my experience. So having a passionate aim tends to, I wouldn't say it evaporates issues of time. Those are always going to be with us, but it changes our relationship to it. So there's so many different ways in which we and our environment are personally affected by having one definite chief aim.
Right. And I'm glad you talked about time. Myself, I have 3 kids and a wife and full-time job. Yep. And I would always say, I want to do this, but I don't have the time. And then I sat back and I looked at the time I spent watching Netflix, or the time I spent just hanging out or doing something like that. And I said, if I just dedicate that much time to what I really want to do, I would probably have enough time.
It's an interesting observation. I mean, I watch very, very little television, almost none. I sleep not as many hours as I ought to. Spend time with my kids and my family. I exercise and I work, and that's largely my life. And I frankly don't have time for a lot of small talk. I don't have time for bad movies. I watch good movies. I did just watch the movie Get Out with my 10-year-old son, and that was an extraordinary experience. But I don't sit around burning hours in front of the tube, or in front of the computer screen. Maybe, I do my social media because it hooks up with my aim. But when people tell me they want to do something and they're sitting up at night, watching hours of television, I feel for them, because that's burning away tremendous amounts of precious and irreplaceable time.
Right. So I just, most recent movie I watched was The Founder, about Ray Kroc.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really good.
It up to me this week, actually. I've seen it. Yeah. I like it very much.
Yeah, and I didn't at first. I hadn't watched. Like I said, I'd stopped. I sworn off Netflix and sworn off TV pretty much for the last few months.
Yeah,
and it was recommended to me. And throughout the movie, I see that his whole thing was about persistence and having his number one aim. And it was so interesting, because I had the question: does anyone who wants to be successful in business need a DCA? And I mean, is that true? Because it may be some people who've been successful without one.
Yeah,
but it seems to me that it's a really important aspect, and it goes back to the same week that I discovered your book. Funny enough, I go to the library, and there's a section where there's free books for free, and I pick up a book called Built to Last by James Collins and Jerry Porras. It was sort of a case study of successful enduring businesses, and the common thread among all these businesses like Sony and HP and businesses like that, compared to other ones that didn't last as long, was the founders installed sort of a clockwork thing where their definite aim was to be a great business, they had a definite aim, and but they didn't really care what they sold. Like when Hewlett Packard started, they didn't really know what they were going to sell, but they knew they were going to be good at it.
Yes,
that's what they really had.
That's very interesting. You're raising so many interesting issues with those observations. Let me try to unpack each one of them. First of all, the movie The Founder is one that I certainly recommend. It's a very interesting movie because it really shows the character of Ray Kroc, at least as the filmmakers conceive of him, in full. You see his moral failings, but you also see what's appealing and what's attractive about him as a person. And that quality of persistency, as you were referencing, is so central to the film's character. I don't know that much about Ray Kroc in real life. I'm sure he had appealing and unappealing qualities about him. I was moved after seeing the movie to read several books about Kroc's life. And ironically enough, of the books that I read, the one that I felt was most blunt, was most direct, was his own autobiography. I felt like I got more out of his own autobiography in terms of an honest reckoning of who he was than I did from books that were written about him, which either tended to lionize him or dramatize him in ways that I wasn't sure were altogether accurate. I'm sure his own autobiography is not altogether accurate, as none of our stories are free from our own sense of what we want to include or exclude. But I thought the movie did a really interesting job, and Michael Keaton's portrayal of the character did an interesting job of depicting a man who had unappealing qualities, but who had one central quality of great appeal, and that was this tremendous persistency and this tremendous flexibility. And to the point you were making about HP and the founders having the goal simply of being a great business, not selling one thing or another, there's a pivotal moment similar to that in the film, The Founder, in which Kroc is speaking to a financial planner, and the financial planner says to him, you know, you're not in the restaurant business. And he says, I'm not. And he goes, no, you're in the real estate business, because the plots of land that he owned and to which he would lease people to build restaurants represented the real value of his holdings. And that was an interesting moment too, because although you could look at that and say, boy, there goes ruthless old Ray Kroc. Yeah, he may have been ruthless, but the man had a flexibility about him. He had a mental flexibility in which he wasn't dedicated to pushing back and saying, no, that's ridiculous. I'm in the restaurant business. You know, the moment that financial planner said to him, you're in the real estate business, it's like a light went on and things changed. So I think in as much as I'm counseling based on my own personal experience, the importance of specificity, it's also very important to be flexible and to have someone come along maybe and say something to you that completely turns your head. Now, you asked the question also, is it necessary to have a definite aim, or can one just maybe have a set of values and maybe people walk into success without having a clear-cut sense of precisely where they want to go and so on? And that's an interesting question. Someone wrote to me recently and said she disagreed with the thesis of my book. She disagreed that it was central and necessary to have a definite chief aim, because she told me a story of a friend of hers who became a college president without ever intending to do so, and that if you spoke to this friend would disavow any intention behind the things that had unfolded in his life, and that these things had unfolded in some sort of natural way outside the circumstances of wherever he thought that he was going. And I recognize and I honor that story, but at the same time, personally speaking, I think it's exceptional. I think if you want to just kind of flow with the current of life without making any determinations about where you want to go, if that's actually possible, sometimes we talk about things rather than really do them, but if that's actually possible, I have no quibble with that, and my hat is off to you. But I think stories like that are exceptional. You know, you're going to find individuals who experience accidents, both happy and tragic, and there are going to be unexpected things that happen to us in life. Sometimes those unexpected things are epic. Sometimes they're very routine and ordinary. When they're epic, we talk about them and we talk about good fortune and so on. The scientist Louis Pasteur is often credited with saying something like, chance favors the prepared mind, the prepared mind. So I think there are actually hidden avenues and hidden grid marks behind where people go. If you end up, or if I end up as a university president or in some notable career circumstance, and there was absolutely no blueprint or no pre-intention behind it, God bless. But I would never discount accidents in life, including happy accidents. But I would say, boy, that is not a life plan. I do believe strongly that having intention and knowing where you want to direct and channel your energies is basic. I think if I were to name anybody in life, a historical figure, someone living who I admire, an artist, a soldier, a statesman, an entrepreneur, a religious thinker, a writer, any figure that I could name who I regard as someone worth emulating, probably leads a life that is marked and characterized by the possession of one obsessive, passionate aim. Usually that's true of our heroes if we look at them carefully.
Right, and I tend to agree. And the anecdotes about folks who just fall into sort of positions or success, I think there's a little bit more there, like you talk about. And as far as companies like Sony, you know, Sony started out making rice cookers, and then Sony became Sony because he was flexible enough to say, I really want to be a really great engineering company if I make rice cookers or if I make CD players, right? So his definite aim was not to make rice cookers. It was just to be a great engineering company.
Yes.
So he had an aim.
Sorry?
So he had an aim.
He had an aim.
Yeah, it was the products that mattered.
Flexibility to it. You know, it's interesting. One could probably write a whole book, maybe I'll look into this, on success that was found by some dramatic, unexpected act of pivoting. You know, maybe somebody intended a certain product, a certain act of artistry, a certain kind of path to notability. And at some moment, as with Sony, as with Ray Kroc, someone said something to them and it totally turned their head around and made them understand, wait a minute, I've misunderstood, I've misevaluated what it was that I'm actually producing. It's an interesting study. You would find a set of values and determination and a core goal in that person, but sometimes one has to be flexible and allow for surprises. I could be surprised today. You could be surprised today. Somebody could say something to you that just clicks something and makes you realize that you've been doing what you wanted all along, but you haven't been focusing on it. And maybe you've treated it as secondary that needs to be made primary.
Right. And another sort of point that comes up in the Founder movie, as well as the sort of the positive thinking aspect.
Yeah.
The persistence, I think, and I think you'll agree, comes from positive thinking. If you think positively that you're going to figure this out or it's going to be successful, that's a positive thinking, and it goes along with persistence. What do you think?
I agree. I agree. It's funny, the movie, as with much of our culture, regards positive thinking through a kind of a jaundiced eye. You know, I mean, it shows Ray in a hotel room one night, you know, having a drink, and he has a portable Victrola with him, and he's listening to a record on positive thinking, which is narrated by a fictional author, but given the name, it's probably supposed to be Norman Vincent Peale or someone like that. And, you know, there's a kind of LGA quality to it, where here's this man alone in a hotel room with a glass of bourbon, and he's listening to this positive thinking recording, and we as the viewer are left uncertain whether to regard this ironically or not. But I think in the end, the movie does demonstrate the effectiveness of Ray's approach to life. Again, there are tragedies in the movie, there are broken relationships in the movie. It is not the story of a man who led a life that you would necessarily want to emulate in all of its facets. But I do think that even despite its critical approach, the movie does bear out the validity of Ray's philosophy at the end, including the positive thinking, which keeps him going when he's a salesman alone on the road, trying to sell these milkshake mixers that nobody seems to want. And for him, the light goes on when he sees this drive-through restaurant called McDonald's that seems to be successful and everybody seems to enjoy. But having that quality of intelligent persistence is so important. And that's the phrase I use in the book, intelligent persistence. There are times, as we've been discussing, where we need to shift. There are times where our plans go wrong. Not every failure is a temporary setback. Most are. But there are instances where something does go truly wrong and we need to reassess. I speak in the book of intelligent persistence. One should be getting some kind of green lights, and even that said, there are going to be fallow periods. There are going to be periods, whether it's a day or whether it's months, where you just seem to be suffering one setback after another. You know, it's interesting, as we're speaking, I'm reminded of something. I'm standing right now in an apartment building on the east side of Manhattan. On the same floor that we live on lives a guy who is a two-time Olympic swimmer. He was on the U.S. Olympic team as a swimmer twice. And he told me personally that in his training, he went through a period of 3 years where he was losing time. 3 years where he seemed to be going in retrograde motion in his time and in his training. Now, can you imagine the persistency that it requires if you're an athlete and timing is everything to you when you're a swimmer? That's what measures the difference between success and failure, placing and not placing. You know, getting through the qualifying rounds of a competition or being left on the sidelines. Your timing is everything. Now, my friend who lives here on this hall with me, he was losing time for 3 years. What kind of internal quality is required to keep pushing through? People talk about setbacks. I think of setbacks in the space of, you know, having a bad day. This guy was having a bad 3 years. You know, I admire him tremendously because he was a great athlete. He was dedicated to his training. He knew what his capacities were, and he had this indelible sense. I mean, I don't know whether to call it faith or call it persistence. I actually use the terms interchangeably because faith can be a tricky word sometimes. I don't always relate well to the word faith, although I am a religious person. But he had this sense of, call it faith, call it persistency, where something within him summoned him to keep going back to the swimming lane for 3 years until his time began to improve. It's just extraordinary. So I don't want people to work at something where maybe they've made a mistake, maybe they've gone in the wrong direction, maybe they do need to reassess. But at the same time, I don't feel it's an exaggeration to say that there is something magical, there is something extraordinary within what we call persistence. You know, it's a word that we use every day. We use it all the time. But it is quite remarkable what can happen over a space of time that other people might see as just miraculous, or might just seem as something that came to us because of some natural gift or something. You know, people would look at my friend and say he's a two-time Olympian. Okay, he's a great swimmer. But what they don't know is that great swimmer suffered 3 years of setback in his training. 3 years. And, you know, there's something about persistency that I think it's almost ineffable. It's almost ineffable. You know, it hones our skills, it mentally prepares us, and it puts us in that undefinable situation where we are occupying a place and time where some cycle of possibility works its way around to us. In the book, I speak of something that I call the law of cycles. It really just has to do with standing your ground, doing what you believe in, doing it well. And there is a cyclical quality to life, sometimes because you're the person who has stood his ground for some number of months or years, and you're constantly improving, constantly honing your skill, your crafts, and so on, taking your talents and making them better and better and better. There does seem to be something cyclical in all facets of our life, something that imitates the cycles of nature. And that was something Ralph Waldo Emerson and the Transcendentalists wrote about. Standing your ground can be remarkably powerful because sometimes a cycle comes around to you that simply wouldn't have come around if your persistence had flagged, if your attention had wandered, if you had left your post, so to speak.
Right. I totally agree. And I sort of also, I really like the phrase intelligent persistence, because I hate to keep going back to the movie, but that movie, The Founder, reminds me sort of the same story as, I guess it would be like a Facebook sort of story. Mm-hmm. It wasn't actually his idea, but he had the vision beyond the folks who had the original idea. The McDonald's original location, they had a great system, and he recognized how great the system was and what he could do with it. And they didn't know it, even though they invented it. And same thing with the Facebook sort of founders. They had an idea, but Zuckerberg was able to see it way beyond what they could see.
Yes.
And despite all the, sort of, back and forth lawsuits about who did what and when, his vision brought that company farther than they probably would have ever brought it because they were sort of locked in their vision for it.
Yes. Yes.
Another thing I want to ask about is like, who are some people that are, I guess, business folks, well-known, anybody notable who you know of that or suspect of are adherents? I mean, it would be anybody who's successful, right? Who are adherents to DCA, positive thinking, those philosophies.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Frankly, I find it easier to identify my heroes in history sometimes
Right.
more than I do in the present, and that may be because the people who I know and who I see in the present have certain flaws about them that might put themselves to the forefront when you're dealing with somebody on a day-to-day level. But I would say this: I have a piece, an article in the October issue of Guideposts magazine about my mother-in-law, a woman named Terry Orr, who is a kind of hero to me. She grew up in an Italian working class background, first woman in her family to attend college, raised two daughters as a divorced and single mom in the town of Waltham, Massachusetts. And she retired several years ago as an associate dean at Harvard Medical School. And she rose up strictly through persistence, intellect, I think a very subtle personal grit. People wouldn't often apply the term grit to her because she has a very loving, very warm, very affectionate demeanor, but that too was part of her strength. She evoked trust in people, and rightly so, rightly so. It was a well-placed trust. There was a compassionateness about her. And so she is today. Today she actually works as a justice of the peace, performing marriages in the state of Massachusetts. And I look at her as a person who never sort of planted a flag somewhere and announced that she was going to dominate the world, but she climbed through academia, through constantly honing her intellect, moving through each job that she was given with this impeccable sense of responsibility and organization and a genuine warmth and openness to other people. And she was seen as a person at every stage of her career upon whom others could depend, And that, combined with her intellect and her training, played a great role in elevating her to the upper ranks of Harvard Medical School's administrative echelon. She's not an MD, she's a PhD, also one of the few PhDs who entered the medical school's upper echelon. I look at her as a kind of a hero, and yet there's a gentleness about her. You know, this wasn't sort of like a George Patton, kind of quality. I think we probably all need to emphasize those strengths which are most intrinsic to us, which are most inherent to us. And it's interesting, sometimes our strengths get hidden because of anxiety, for example, or because of a proclivity to act out emotionally in some way, which is another reason why positive thinking can be so important, can be so central. There's a whole host of other people that I have admired over the years, very often because they may have had a vision and just seen it through with a certain degree of totality. I admire the radio broadcaster Earl Nightingale, who recorded a lecture in the mid-1950s called The Strangest Secret. Earl, who's now deceased, had grown up a child of the Great Depression. And as he was growing up, he was trying to determine whether there was a concrete or definable difference between people who were successes or failures in life. And he read many books of practical philosophy, moral and religious ideas, books on right conduct, ranging from the Tao Te Ching to the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And one day he found Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, which is a book that's a tremendous inspiration on me and it's inspiration on my book that we're discussing, The Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim. And Earl came upon what he felt was this formula, which he believed separated exceptional from unexceptional people. And it was this: we become what we think about. We become what we think about. And Earl took that formula so seriously that he structured his whole life around it. I believe there's great truth in that. You can put it in different ways. The expression I use is thoughts are causative, but it's the same insight as Earl's. And Earl's insight would have just been a kind of an inspirational page-a-day calendar thing that you tear off and throw out and never think about again, but for the fact that it incited passion in him and it drove him through his whole life. And I always love when I hear a story about somebody who's working and working and working, and then they find that one thing that just brings together everything that they've been looking for. And for Earl, it was just that simple phrase, that clarifying phrase that came to him that summarized everything he had been reading and everything that he had been looking for. We become what we think about. And I admire him because I think he had a real search, and that search led him to a very practical place.
Great. That's a great story. So we're going to wrap up a little bit now. One thing I always want to ask any guest that I'm going to have on is I need more mentors. You've been great. You've given me some great advice, and given everybody some great advice about having an aim if you want to start something. Can you suggest any more people I could reach out to for possible advice?
Oh, that's very interesting. One of my former publishing colleagues, Joel Fotinos, is somebody I admire very much. I advise reaching out to him. I advise you and everybody listening or watching to read Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. You probably are an old expert at it at this point.
I'm in my third reading or listening to it. I like to listen to books on tape and then read them, because while I commute, I like to listen so I can just kind of seep it in, and then I go back and I read them. So
yeah, well, let me suggest an experiment to you, and I'll probably do this too before the year is out. I suggest to you and to all your listeners, even if you've read Think and Grow Rich several times before, go out and buy a brand new copy of the book, a good quality copy that you're proud to carry around with you, that you're proud to see on your shelf. Reread it from the very beginning as if you've never cracked the spine, as if you've never turned a single page. Don't look upon the exercises as familiar, or I get it, or I've done that already, or I can skip the chapter on savings and expenses, I'm already doing that. Throw all your preconceptions out the window. But take that book, and I'll do it with you, and reread it as though you are encountering it for the very first time. And something that I always tell friends, and I say this advice from the heart, I tell it to people in my own family: do the exercises as if your life depends on it. Be that passionate, be that deadly serious, be that dedicated. And I would say to anyone, things will change in life. We can't control every circumstance. We can't control every accident of geography, environment, weather. We live under many laws and forces, and that's a fact. But the force of the mind is our most underutilized force. And the force of the emotions, which run on a separate track, is also greatly underutilized. That book helps you employ both. Read Think and Grow Rich as if for the very first time. Throw out the window any preconceptions. Start with a brand new mint copy of the book, whichever version you like, and do the exercises as though your life depends on it. Things will change. I'm going to do that myself before this year is out.
All right. Thanks so much, Mitch, for coming on. That's great advice for everyone. I will do that. I plan to do that, actually. And like I said, thanks again. It is very valuable advice, and I'll follow up with you and let you know how things are going.
Thank you. Great talking.
All right. Thank you.